In this part of the lesson, we will examine the elements of the story. Now remember, if you did not complete this activity, please pause this video, complete the activity, and then come back. Now, let's begin. Now, we would have read the story. We would have seen the different elements coming out in the story. And when I say the elements that we're looking at characters, setting, plot, point of view. When I say plot, I mean all the events, point of view, climax, resolution. Now, let's begin. Now, the story begins with our exposition. And based on the previous lessons, we would have identified that in the exposition of our story, we either present the setting or the characters and both. Now, in our exposition, we would have seen that the story is set in a graveyard. And if we're going to be a little more specific, it is night, it is windy, it's dark, and it seems very scary, right? If we look at the characters, we have a narrator, an unnamed narrator. We don't get the name of the narrator. And then we have another character who is described as a tall, muscular man, an unnamed man. And then we also have Carl, the brother of the narrator. We have to also remember that Carl is not in the story. He does not physically appear in the story. He is only mentioned throughout the story. And finally, you must be wondering, what about the body in the casket? Also, we're not given any details about the body, but yes, a body was mentioned. Next, we're going to look at point of view. From which perspective is the story told? Followed by, we're going to look at the conflict. What exactly is the conflict of the story? Now, the story is being told from the first person perspective. We see that we have a narrator, and the narrator tells us the story. Because it is told from the first person perspective, we see the use of the first person pronoun, I, my. Okay. Next, the conflict is man versus himself. The narrator struggles with the idea of the death of his brother. And so because of that doubt, that internal question of, is my brother really dead? Is it that my brother is really the one who is in this casket that we buried? Because of that struggle, we see the character going through all of what's the word I'm looking for? The stress and concern of digging up his brother's grave. Finally, we're going to be looking at climax and resolution. The climax of the story can be identified as the point in which the audience is not sure what is coming next. It is the highest point of action in the story. The arrow identifies the section of the story where the reader is not sure what will happen. When the narrator opens the casket, we are not sure who or what is going to be in the coffin. And so this can be considered as the highest point of action. Now, one question I know you might be asking yourself is, how is it the climax is so near or so close to the end of the story? Typically, the climax is not as near as this one. However, because of the nature of this story, we see that the climax occurs and there is not a lot of falling action before we have our resolution. Now, our resolution is where we end or we resolve or we tie up the conflict, right? And right here, the writer leaves us in some sort of suspense. The story ends by revealing that it is not the narrator's brother who is in the coffin. However, who is it? Where did the body come from? We don't know. And so the reader is now left with questions. The reader is now left wondering, wow, who is it? What's going on? Where is the actual brother? And so, because of that, the reader is left hanging to an extent. Now, this is the end of the elements of the story. Now, as we end the elements of the story, our next slide is our revision. Let us now question ourselves to see what we actually understand.